It's no secret that on this channel, I like tabletop games and I like LEGO. If you're on the Discord, which, hey, link is in the description, you would have probably seen some of my Warhammer 40k themed LEGO builds recently. I think that in a lot of ways, LEGO is an ideal medium for something like Warhammer. A Space Marine tank is already pretty blocky to begin with, and, LEGO Castle can easily be adapted to something like Warhammer Fantasy with the addition of a few specific pieces and the like. The Discord is of course not the only place where you can find my builds. I also post them on both Warhammer and LEGO subreddits whenever I feel good enough about a particular design. And, without fail, whenever I do, someone will post a comment about how I found the only way to make Warhammer even more expensive. It's an interesting comment, and one that's common enough that I think the entire community probably believes that it's true. But is it actually? In this video, I'm going to look at the ins and outs of using LEGO for Warhammer army building. I'm going to be primarily focusing on Warhammer Fantasy, as that is what I play the most, but I do have some comments about Warhammer 40k as well. This video is not going to be about how you could go about using an army to play Warhammer, the Old World, or any other Warhammer Fantasy game. I'm specifically focusing on the army building component and the costs of putting together armies. I have plans for another video that will explore the topic of using LEGO for wargames in more detail, so this video will assume that you've already figured out how to use the LEGO. You just need to know if it would be worth your while to. So I'd like to lay down some foundations for this topic because of the bifurcated nature of these two hobbies. Both LEGO and Warhammer are their own separate hobbies, and I want this video to basically appeal to both groups of fans. If you're a LEGO fan with a very large collection, I would recommend you try using it for tabletop games. If you're a Warhammer fan who's put off by Games Workshop's policies and prices, maybe you should consider LEGO as a suitable alternative. In my own club, I use LEGO miniatures very often for tabletop games, not just for D&D, as the LEGO D&D subreddit might suggest, but pretty much for a wide variety of wargames from things like Frostgrave all the way to games of Warhammer Fantasy. Which of course brings me to my first point, scope. The first thing that I think you should consider when thinking about using LEGO for Warhammer is what will the scope of my force actually be? In the same way that getting into Mordheim is much cheaper than playing a 2,000 point game of Old World, understanding what the scope of your LEGO collection can, or could do, is very important. If you only have a few minifigures, it seems like they would be perfectly suitable for smaller types of games, like Mordheim or Blood Bowl, or heck, even Warcry, if you're an Age of Sigmar player. I'm primarily talking about Warhammer Fantasy in this video, but there's no rule that says you couldn't apply this to Age of Sigmar either. Understanding what you want your collection to do is one of the most important parts of managing its costs. If you're someone who has a huge hobby budget, then you, by all means, can be quite free with how you spend it. If you're on a more limited budget, I think that LEGO can still be a viable model source if you're willing to put in the work. So, let's do that. In order to examine the price points that you might have to spend to build an army, I'm going to use a LEGO project of mine that I put together about a year ago. In 2023, Games Workshop put out a bunch of Regiments of Renown box sets for a bunch of Age of Sigmar armies. Well, not really, they're intended as mercenaries, but you know what I mean. Normally, that sort of thing would pass me by completely, but then I saw an old world-style dwarven box set, Norgrim's Rune Throng, which of course at that time retailed for about $110 US, based on this SpikeYbits article. Now that's a lot of money to spend on a box set. In this box, you only get 1 Rune Lord, 10 Iron Drakes, and 10 Longbeards. I saw that and I thought to myself, that's a lot of money for basically 21 models, which is a sentence that you could probably use for a lot of Games Workshop products. I was, of course, in the dwarf mood at the time, and I've never actually collected any dwarves, so I thought, why not try to use LEGO for Warhammer? So I set myself a task of building this force out of LEGO. As you can see from the pictures, I sort of went overboard, and I built myself a much larger dwarven force than I had intended to. Of course, I include things here, like a dwarf on a ram, which is not something that you can do in the old world, but you know what, it's my collection, I'm going to do with it as I feel. So, I'd like to highlight here, in particular, my Rune Lord mini, which I think is actually quite close to the original, despite the two mediums being completely different. So, of course, the question is, how did I put together this force, and what would it cost you to do more or less the same? My primary source of models is the service from LEGO called Pick a Brick, or PAB. This service is not as well known in the wider community as it should be, but it allows you to pay for LEGO in terms of individual bricks and parts, instead of having to buy whole complete sets. I do have to acknowledge that LEGO, if you're only ever buying whole sets, is quite an expensive hobby. I certainly don't begrudge anyone whose only experience of buying LEGO is paying $100 for a set that maybe includes 4 or 5 minifigs. If you had to build an army that way, LEGO would be astronomically more expensive than Warhammer by a huge margin. It wouldn't even be close. But, of course, the miracle of PAB is that you pay much lower rates on parts that you actually want, of course, including minifigure parts, and that is what we'll use to build our Runethrong. So, using PAB, it would cost about, at the time of writing, $1.92 to get a minifig consisting of a torso, head, helmet, and the mini legs. Since we're building a dwarf army, we're not going to be using the full-size Lego legs, but, for the most part, they are roughly comparable in price. A musket is about 20 cents, and a large two-handed axe or hammer is about 30 cents to 50 cents, depending on what you're looking for and what you're actually willing to make. Even accounting for some of the price differences, you can see that it would cost about $40 to get these minifigs, maybe $15 at the most for the weapons, but this is of course without factoring in the shipping. So compare that to $110, and it's quite a substantial saving, I think, especially compared to the Games Workshop box. Of course, you'd have to multiply this by larger amounts if you wanted to play Old World, so let's look at another case. A box of Dwarf Quarrelers costs about $85 from Games Workshop directly. I know that you can probably, let's be honest, definitely get a cheaper price if you're buying from an external retailer like Element Games or something, and by the way, this is not a sponsor, but for the sake of the video, let's just assume that you're paying Games Workshop prices as is. So, for $85, you get 36 Dwarf Minis that can be built with all handguns or all crossbows, or half and half if you like. Heck, you could probably build most of them with crossbows and maybe a couple of handguns if you really wanted to. Considering that I've never seen anyone run an entire block of 36 Quarrelers in one unit, I think it's pretty safe to say that you definitely want to run that block of 36 as multiple smaller units. Definitely for additional flexibility, but also just because if you have 36 guys in one unit, you'd either have a massively long line of them, or most of them wouldn't be able to shoot. So, for my force, I built basically 10 Quarrelers, which is about a third of the actual number that you'd get in one of those boxes, all equipped with guns, because, they're my favorite. I'll try to scale this up for the Old World equivalent. So to build a Quarreler with an armored torso, because the actual Quarrelers are wearing mail, a bearded face, a helmet, and a gun, that comes out to about $2.15 for one collection of parts and basically one minifigure. So for 36 minifigures, that's about $77. Now let's say that you wanted the option to equip them with crossbows as well. Well, that'd be about $10 for 36 crossbows. So $87 in total for 36 Quarrelers that can be equipped with full crossbows or full guns or any mix in between. Excluding the shipping costs, which can be highly variable, let me just say that I think it would probably be cheaper to ship that amount of Lego directly from Lego than it would be to probably ship that one box from Games Workshop. Not necessarily because Games Workshop are so terrible with their shipping, but just because I've ordered from Pick-a-Pick before, and they will send you the Lego in a smaller envelope or letter parcel than they will a giant box that Games Workshop ships their minis in. So yes, I think the shipping costs would certainly add up, but I think it still would be cheaper to ship the Lego than it would be to ship the minis. Especially, of course, if you're ordering multiple boxes. Those will make the shipping costs add up substantially faster. So, excluding the shipping costs, I think that you have a really good deal here for a couple of reasons. Firstly, these minis don't have to be assembled or painted. You just get them, put them together, and they're ready to play with. Yes, you have to assemble them in the sense that you have to put a torso on a leg, but that's not the same thing as taking off each of the parts of all of the screws, gluing them together, priming them, and then painting them. You get them, and they're basically ready to play with. No painting, no priming, no gluing. You also don't have to spend any additional money on resources or time. Right? You don't have to spend money on having glue or paints or anything like that. So you will actually, I think, get a significant saving, especially in the long run. Secondly, these minis are not a one and done kind of deal. If you're starting with 0 Lego parts, well, congratulations, you just bought yourself 36 torsos, 36 legs, 36 guns, etc. The huge appeal of Lego, for me at least, is that you can decide if you want these guys to actually be dwarves. And if you don't want them to be dwarves, you can just take them apart and reallocate the parts as you see fit. Next time, you don't need to buy another 36 whole minis if you want to actually use them, right? For example, you could just buy 36 regular legs, and suddenly your dwarf minis can be turned into humans. Yes, you can probably reuse some of the parts that you get from the Games Workshop kits, because they are multi-part kits, but once those parts are used, once they've been glued and primed and painted, well, those parts are locked into that unit, unless you want to spend all that time to carefully remove them, strip the paint, and start over. So once you've got a large collection of Lego, I think that the amount of money that you need to spend actually goes down over time. As your collection increases, you've got more and more options for building units, and you don't always have to buy more stuff two field units, right? If you have only a small collection, then yes, you might have to spend money to get new parts. But if you've got a very large collection, you can just dig into that collection to rebuild units. And with a little bit of creativity, you can make that collection go a very long way. Each new unit in Old World requires a new box of parts. For LEGO, once you have enough torsos, heads, legs, etc., you've got the basis of new units for your army. Yes, you are still spending significant amounts of money. I'm not going to lie to you and pretend that you're spending basically no cash. It's not as if you're making minis out of something like paper, right? But you are potentially spending a lot less than Games Workshop depending on what you want and how you want it, right? I find that it works out quite a bit cheaper to plan for something like 1,000 points with LEGO than it does with plastic minis. And once I've got those 1,000 points, well, those minis can be recycled. Now, I know that I have it on easy mode because I basically play Empire. And if you're playing Empire, you could, with some wiggle room, recycle a lot of Empire stuff into something like, say, for example, Bretonia, or maybe Dogs of War, or, at a pinch, something like the High Elves or Dark Elves. Yeah, sure, it's not exactly the case that each LEGO guy could give you, say, for example, a Skaven or Orc or a Demon or something like that, but I don't necessarily think it's as bad as it seems, especially because a Skaven or an Orc or a Lizardman is just a Skaven or Orc or a Lizardman in Games Workshop plastic. Those things can definitely not be recycled into other units, unless you're just willing to proxy them and have your opponent say, that's okay, right? You're just not locked into using minis like that in that way. And also, you're not locked into specifically Old World either, right? Your minis, once you've got them, can be used for a wide variety of games, as I do. Of course, you pay for all of this in terms of the customization and the fidelity. Yes, I'm not going to lie to you and say that these dwarves look exactly like the Games Workshop minis. I think for some people, they might probably look a little bit too goofy. They probably wouldn't necessarily look as realistic as they want them to be. For my purposes, I don't mind. I think that from a distance, they're perfectly fine, and for playing, that doesn't really bother me. But I think that when it comes to a Games Workshop mini, or really most plastic minis, those are going to be a lot more detailed, and if you're the kind of person who values details, you're definitely going to benefit from those types of minis than these. Furthermore, when you're painting a mini from scratch, you have full control over it. You can decide the paint scheme and even add lots of additional details. Yes, you can paint your LEGO, but I think that really defeats the utility of them in my opinion. So, if you're much more of a gamer than a painter, I think LEGO is a great idea. But if you really want to customize your guys, then the regular minis will always be better. Wargames is ultimately about balancing all the different interests that you have between collecting, painting, gaming, and hobbying. Finally, I just want to add that the LEGO costs can add up. While there is a large secondhand LEGO market in the form of Bricklink, Pick-a-Brick is still the most convenient place to get parts in bulk. The issue with Pick-a-Brick, however, is that it's not available globally. Basically, if you're in the US and Europe, you'll have a much easier time getting the parts than if you're elsewhere. I'd really love for LEGO to expand Pick-a-Brick to other regions of the world, but I don't know if that's going to happen. You can still make use of mail forwarding services and the like to get your stuff, but it can and will add additional costs. Also, LEGO differentiates between the so-called bestseller parts and standard parts on Pick-a-Brick. These two categories are shipped separately, so when you're placing an order, be mindful that you might actually have to pay shipping and service fees on two orders if your actual order has a mix of the two part types. Luckily, LEGO will waive the service fee on orders over $14, and let's be honest, if you're buying an army for Warhammer, you're going to be spending over $14, and that just means that it's better to buy in bulk. Finally, you will note that I have parts on my dwarf army that are not from Pick-a-Brick. I definitely went to the secondhand market to get them for customization, but, with Warhammer minis, generally you're going to spend a lot of time and some money to potentially customize them. We're talking about customized paint schemes, maybe you're going to make some stuff out of green stuff, or maybe you're going to do kit bashing and things like that. It is generally possible for you to mostly spend your time to customize your minis. But with LEGO, you're mostly going to be spending money, and perhaps maybe a little bit of time to customize them. LEGO doesn't keep every single part of their extensive catalog on Pick-a-Brick. Some parts get retired. If you're really looking for something specific, you might have to pay for it, if it exists at all. I would only recommend doing this for heroes and lords of your army, and not for the rank and file. If you want to really customize them, you've got to be willing to pay. And that I know can definitely be a damper on things. I know for a lot of people, the appeal of something like Warhammer is that your army is your dudes. But especially if you're playing something like Warhammer Fantasy, then you're going to be building a large army, and you're not necessarily going to be able to customize each individual person to your liking. I think if you're going to be doing something like, for example, Mordheim, then it does make a little bit more sense to try and customize each individual specific hero. By the way, LEGO for Mordheim is great. One problem that I have with Mordheim is that it's usually WYSIWYG, right? What you see is what you get. But it can be difficult if you want to actually switch things out. If you have a model that's armed with a sword and a shield, and then you decide, actually, I want to give him 2 weapons or maybe a great weapon, you have to have a completely different model. Well, with Lego, you just take off the weapons, swap them for others, and you've got your perfect model, right? I think it's actually very, very ideal. Unfortunately, that's not a kind of thing that's very popular yet, but hopefully, maybe this video can change some minds. I think that in its own way, Lego for something like Warhammer offers you something that you can get on the table fast, relatively cheaply, and it won't be difficult to transport. If you're not concerned about making a custom army, or you want something that you can easily transport, store, and use, I really think you should consider Lego for your games of Warhammer. Finally, I said I would talk about stuff regarding Warhammer 40k. And in that regard, in some ways, the people who play Warhammer 40k are maybe a little bit spoiled, because there are actually a couple of knockoff LEGO brands that make direct Warhammer minis like Guardsmen or Space Marines. In this video, I've talked specifically about using official Games Workshop minis and official LEGO parts, but I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with using off-brand parts, especially if you're looking for something specific, right? If LEGO is not going to make Warhammer stuff, other people definitely will. I would just caution you to be mindful about what you're buying from and where, right? I think we should try to encourage people to be responsible consumers if we can. So, thank you for your attention. If you've made it this far, I understand that this is kind of a different video from what I'm normally making. Some of my audience is interested in LEGO, some of it is interested in Warhammer. Hopefully this video has bridged the gap between these two sides. It is my hope that this video gave you a new perspective on using either LEGO or Warhammer for one or the other. I'm certainly more than happy to play against somebody using a LEGO army, and I hope that after this video you will be too. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe if you want more videos like this. The channel is steadily moving towards its 1K goal. It would mean a lot to me if you shared the videos and subscribed. Thanks again for your time. Until the next video, take care.